So the Friday the 13th franchise has been sitting at the bottom of Crystal Lake for 16 years, but will probably be coming back with a new show called Crystal Lake. So here are my 5 crazy ideas that I personally wouldn't mind seeing in the show. All right, so this isn't going to be a ranking of my 5 ideas. This is just going to be 5 ideas that I personally wouldn't mind seeing in the show. And yeah, I'll admit right off the bat, some of these ideas are pretty wild. Yeah, definitely. And something they could do is blend some of these ideas in season 1, or just kind of use one of these ideas as the foundation for season 1. But yeah, make sure you stay tuned till the end of this video, because the idea that I mentioned last on this list is definitely the craziest idea on this entire list. All right, so the first idea that I'm going to talk about on this list is probably the least crazy idea that I'm going to give, and also an idea that's already been talked about as the probable foundation for this show, which is a prequel idea, right? What happened before the first movie, but I'm gonna give my take on kind of the direction that they could go. So of course, the first scene in the original Friday the 13th, we pan down over this lake, Camp Crystal Lake in 1958. We see these counselors singing Hallelujah, and then 2 of them sneak off to have sex. And as Randy would say in the Scream franchise, that's a big no-no. So of course, the big question is what really happened after that scene, or after Jason drowned in the lake in 1957, up into the original movie, most of the original movie in 1980. Why do all the people in the convenience store look at Annie weird when she says that she's going to work up at the camp? They didn't know that the camp was going to be officially reopening. Why does the truck driver ask her all those questions? Why does he tell her not to go? Why is he so nervous? Really, just about her going. And yeah, of course, we know that at least 2 people were murdered at Camp Crystal Lake, but what is the true origin story behind the nickname Camp Blood? You could even name the first episode in the first season Camp Blood, but what happened during that time frame? What are the details that went down with everything? The fires that we hear about from the truck driver, the water being contaminated in 1962 that we also hear about from the truck driver, and the fact that nobody ever came to a conclusion, nobody ever found out who really did that. Why? Why did nobody find out? Was there things being covered up? Is there more to that story of just this cursed camp? And like I said, this idea is probably the most likely idea to a certain extent of the direction that they'll go with this show, just from everything that we've been hearing about it. But it's also an idea that is definitely one of the most interesting ideas for me personally, and one of the ideas that I would probably enjoy the most, and I think that they would have the most success with possibly pulling off. But just this whole aesthetic of the 60s and the 70s, probably between these different decades, is an aesthetic for a slasher movie and this type of a story that I personally really enjoy. Of course, we would have Pamela Voorhees and her origin and more of her life mixed in there. Pamela Voorhees, Mrs. Voorhees, one of my favorite horror villains of all time. She is just incredible in the original Friday the 13th. And also keep it a bit of a mystery. Keep it a bit of a whodunit for those people who haven't seen Friday the 13th or haven't seen the opening to Scream, I guess you could say as well. And also, you could add in some other red herrings and some other people who are also involved with Pamela Voorhees, just involved with sabotaging the camp, and have some sort of an angle and a reason they also want revenge in the story, because that would not only appeal to new fans of the franchise who maybe have never seen the movies, but that would also really create something new and fresh for people like me, who are diehard fans of the franchise and who already know so much about the whole Pamela Voorhees story and just the origin of this nickname Camp Blood, to add some new things in there. And like I said, that's probably the most likely direction that this show will go. And for me personally, I know this is probably something that's not all that unique or all that creative, because this is just stuff that we already know about the show. You're just kind of expanding upon it a little bit and adding some things, of course, but I think it's something that could be done really well. And I know kind of doing a period piece where you're back in the 60s or the 70s can get really expensive, but apparently this show is going to have a pretty big budget. They were even talking about $10 million per episode, possibly, for this show. So, I mean, there's a chance they could pull this off. All right, so another idea that I think they could go with for the show is disregarding a lot of the stuff that we saw in the original Friday the 13th as possibly the origin to this entire story, and making their own origin story behind Friday the 13th. We all kind of, and most of us know the story behind Pamela and Jason. And as much as I enjoy that story, and I really do, it's one of my favorite stories in all of horror. I love that origin. I love just the idea behind Pamela Voorhees and what she did in that original. I wouldn't mind them kind of taking a swing with this franchise and creating something new. We've seen it with characters like Michael Myers in the Cult of Thorn timeline, also in Rob Zombie's movies as well. They even did it in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, showing us the origin of Leatherface. And I know that's not everybody's cup of tea by any means. Not everybody wants to see what's behind the evil. Not everybody wants to see what's behind the curtain, but I wouldn't mind them, like I said, taking a swing at it. And like I mentioned a second ago, you'd be creating something new and fresh, so you wouldn't have to explain the plot holes that exist in the Friday the 13th franchise. Because yeah, as much as I love this franchise, yes, there are a lot of plot holes that don't make a lot of sense, but you'd be creating maybe a new story for Jason Voorhees. Maybe Jason never even drowned at the lake. Maybe there was this big prank or just some sort of an incident involving camp counselors or kids in this town, and that's the reason why Jason became disfigured. Kind of like The Burning, one of the greatest slasher movies ever made, definitely one of the greatest 80s slasher movies ever made, but in a little bit of a way, it would kind of be like the sequel that we never unfortunately got to The Burning, but just this idea I think would be pretty fun of like a prank at summer camp that's gone wrong, that has kind of snowballed into what we see for the rest of the season. And yeah, summer camps are easily one of my personal favorite settings for a slasher movie or slasher TV show just in general. I love it for sure, but maybe as a new, fresh approach, we'd kind of start the show in town. We'd spend some time at the school and other things like that, and you would follow Pamela Voorhees and the rest of these characters at this small northeastern town. But then Pamela decides the best place to get revenge would be at summer camp, because that's a place where there's not a lot of adults and there's definitely no cops. So yeah, it would definitely have some similarities with my first idea, which is definitely a prequel story, but this idea would be a little bit more of a let's go out and create our own origin prequel story to Friday the 13th instead of just building off of some of the little nuggets that we were told in that movie that happened and then just expanding upon that. It wouldn't be that. It would kind of just be creating a new, fresh origin story for the franchise, a new, fresh origin story for the character, which in my opinion wouldn't affect the original origin story. It would just be something new. Even though this idea isn't anything super crazy, I just think it would be kind of fun. All right, so if you've been around my channel for a little bit, you know that I'm a big fan of the Friday the 13th movie from 2009, that encapsulation of the first four movies, the look of that movie, the grittiness of that movie, the humor in that movie, the brutality of that movie. I love it so much. It's such a fun slasher movie in so many different ways. So my next idea is to take that opening scene from the Friday the 13th movie from 2009 and just run with that. Use that as the foundation of your entire show, the look of it, the aesthetic of all of that. Maybe even use a similar scene like they have in the 2009 movie at the end of the show or the end of season 1. Now, basically, you would use that as your foundation to explain in your own way how Jason shows up in part 2. So Pamela gets beheaded. They thought Jason drowned. But what really happened is everybody, like I said, thought Jason drowned, but really he actually just swam to shore to another side of the lake where nobody saw him. Nobody saw him for hours. He was basically hiding just out of pure embarrassment for being bullied. The kids and the counselors eventually break down and they tell the sheriff that the kid probably died. They hadn't seen him in hours, and yeah, he's probably down there. And then while they're searching for the body, then they tell his mom prematurely, Mrs. Voorhees, of course, that Jason drowned in the lake. Now, Jason is still hiding out. He's embarrassed. He's considering running away completely, just leaving this place, these people that have treated him so terribly. Even his mom probably has treated him terribly at times, I'm sure. But then a few hours later, Mrs. Voorhees returns to the camp in a pure fit of rage. And it all goes down, and Jason does also make his way back to the camp, but it's not in time to tell his mom that he's still alive, And then his mom, of course, gets beheaded like we see in the 2009 movie. And like in the 2009 movie, you would also explain why Jason is so drawn to the machete in particular. You would continue that story. You'd also continue the story of Camp Crystal Lake now being abandoned, but people still go there from time to time. In the 2009 movie, they're going there because of the weed. But maybe in this show, you would implement greed. I mean, that always works. Maybe some capitalist prick got the land for super cheap, eventually ended up building this resort on the lake or just nearby, kind of in Jason's territory a little bit. People are drinking champagne, occasionally wandering off to this abandoned Camp Crystal Lake. Now, yeah, the opening to the 2009 movie is only like 2 or 3 minutes long, but this would essentially be a prequel to the 2009 movie. You'd kind of continue the same tone of that movie, the same look of that movie, continue the tunnel system that they implemented with Jason, how he gets around so fast, how he hides the evidence, where he hides the bodies. Continue to blend the fun moments in that 2009 movie with the brutality, with the gore, with the grittiness, right? Friday the 13th, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Even in the 2009 movie, we get a little bit more of a glimpse into kind of the police department and the sheriff in that particular movie, and you can kind of just expand upon that, make the police department a little bit crooked. Maybe the sheriff over the years had been covering up evidence because, he doesn't want the town to just become a ghost town, essentially, because, he doesn't want everybody to know that people come here and they just get murdered. So there's a crooked angle to that as well. Of course, you would layer on more characters throughout the story. I don't know. I just think that could be a great foundation for a potential show. All right, so my next idea would specifically focus on the first movie and the second movie, and specifically what happened in between those two movies. Because if you remember, yes, in the first part of part 2, we do see 2 months after the events in the first movie where Alice gets killed right there. So what happened? How did Jason get there? How did Jason bring Mama Voorhees' head and then put it into the fridge? What happened there? You can kind of expand upon that, have some more victims along the way. And then if you remember, there's a 5-year gap between Friday the 13th Part 1 and Friday the 13th Part 2, at least the majority of that movie, where we're following Paul and Ginny and the rest of the counselors. So yeah, with that 5-year gap between most of the events that happened in the original movie and the second movie, I mean, that's a pretty big runway to kind of just use some ideas to fill in those gaps, to add some more victims to the body count. Just a lot of things going on that you can do there. Like Tom Savini said in part 2, the reason why he didn't come back to do the special effects in the second movie was because he was like, what? Jason drowned in the lake. What do you mean? There's going to be a Jason in the second Friday the 13th movie? So yeah, you would have a shot at explaining what happened there, what happened after the events of the original movie. How did Jason track down Alice, like I said? You could even go fully crazy with this foundation of the show. You could go supernatural to explain, yeah, okay, Jason did die, but this is how he was resurrected. Maybe Jason was even in another dimension. You could kind of make it like Stranger Things a little bit. Maybe Camp Crystal Lake has some of these weird, unexplained kind of hotbeds for supernatural events that happen. Things like we see in places like Joshua Tree or other weird places in the United States that have like these weird energy vortexes or something. Like I said, if you want to go pretty crazy, you can, and some people would be down for that. But really, in the end, I think a lot of fans of the Friday the 13th franchise would be interested in seeing what happened during that 5-year gap between Friday the 13th Part 1 and Friday the 13th Part 2, and I would be one of them. All right, now, like I said, my last idea was going to be the craziest idea on this entire list. So just hear me out here for a second. So my next idea for the foundation for this show could be, in a crazy way, Jason would essentially be a government experiment that went wrong. Now, I'll explain what I'm talking about. I know that sounds pretty crazy, but just buckle up and bear with me so I can explain what I mean. So basically, this idea would involve both the town and the camp. The camp would essentially be this huge money maker for the town, kind of a big part of the town's identity. You would have kids disappearing over the years, kidnapped by this research facility to perform experiments on, or even just kids that were born disfigured, who are promised, their parents were promised like groundbreaking treatments to try to help them overcome their disabilities. Then of course, these treatments kind of go south. The parents are upset. The parents want revenge. One kid in particular escapes and also wants revenge. And even if the facility eventually closes, he's coming for you along with the other parents. So basically this government facility would be right next to the camp, nearby in the woods, kind of tucked away in the mountains, which is one of the ways that they get the kids. And they also just kind of claim the kids were lost in the woods. But of course, that wouldn't work for very long because, yeah, eventually they would close down the camp after the first, 1 or 2 kids or something like that. So the specialty of the facility would really revolve around this groundbreaking treatment for the kids that they offer up to the people in the area. And now, of course, they wouldn't really reveal who's kind of involved, who's behind all of this, but you would randomly start to see these unmarked cars. You would see weird people creeping around because they're starting to find evidence. They're slowly peeling back the onion a little bit. You're finding out that, okay, wait, the mayor is actually up to some things probably. There's some things going on with the mayor that kind of seem a little bit crooked. Obviously, money would be involved, favor in elections from government officials, money laundering would be happening, and all this stuff would kind of snowball. And some of the people in town that are involved kind of can't get out now because they are way too far in. And like I said earlier, the camp would be involved because the camp's just a big part of the town. A ton of people work there. They help to run it. They help to keep it up and keep it going during the summer and the fall in particular. And also you would just incorporate some of these big scenes and big moments in the show at the camp. Now, I know this idea of Jason being a government experiment that's gone wrong is kind of a little bit of a crazy idea in some ways, but I think there could be some fun to be had there. Do we just want them to retread the stuff that we already know about the Friday the 13th franchise? Or go out on a limb and do something kind of crazy and unique for this show? Let me know down in the comments what you think. Now, in the end, if we just end up getting a show that's kind of similar to the Scream TV show, but it's set at summer camp, would I watch that? Yeah, of course I would watch it, but I just think that would be a safe option. That would be a cheap option. That would be a bit of a letdown for me without question. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of want them to take a swing with this show. Also, yeah, like a lot of you already know, a lot of things have been happening behind the scenes with this show. Not all of it good. The show was supposed to come out in 2025 in the fall. Clearly doesn't look like that's going to be happening because the showrunner, Brian Fuller, ended up quitting the show over what sounds like creative issues. He didn't agree with the direction that they were thinking about going for the show. That guy was kind of the showrunner for that show, Hannibal, if you've seen that show. But recently they signed on Brad Caleb Kane, who's also going to be the showrunner for the new Welcome to Derry show as well, who's going to be kind of kicking off this show also and helping to run this show. So things are kind of pushing forward now a little bit. It's getting a little bit more promising. There's also been some rumors picking up steam recently that they might have finally found their Mrs. Voorhees to play that character, in Linda Cardellini, who's an actress who has a long history of doing a lot of great stuff. So that's pretty promising. Things are kind of moving along. Hopefully we get some more concrete evidence of what's going to happen with this show and just some more promising things because, like I said, 16 years it's been for Friday the 13th fans like me where we haven't really gotten anything with the franchise at all other than some great fan films, which have been awesome. But we really do need this show and some other projects within this IP to just come to life, man. I'm really looking forward to hearing hopefully some good stuff coming soon about this show. But there you go, everybody. Those are 5 crazy ideas that I wouldn't mind seeing the Crystal Lake show go. If you want some more Friday the 13th content from me right now, go ahead and check out one of these videos next to me. If you don't want to miss future videos on the channel, make sure you subscribe. That is the best way to do that. All of my social media links will be down below in the description as well if you want to go and follow me over there. But thanks so much for watching, everybody. My name is Matt, and I will talk to you in the next one.